Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we're going to cover a few tips on how to use the content creator in Engage. Now before we start, I want to give some tips on what you should do to prep before using the content creator. Now, some of the things you should do before you jump into the content creator is one, ideate on your idea for the experience you want to build. And second, collect a variety of objects and or images, video clips, sound. Make sure they're all licensed so you own them or they're free use. But that's going to create a base of assets for you to use on the content creator. Now, a few sites that I like to use include Sketchfab. Just make sure you click downloadable and you look for objects that are licensable. You'll see an option that says CC when looking at a certain object. Let's look at this dinosaur. Right here, license CC, non-commercial. That's non-commercial, but if it says CC, then that means you can use it. It's free use. And obviously you can buy stuff and then you own it. Another site that I like to use is CG Trader. And now when you're downloading stuff from these sites, you often want to download GLB files. So when you click on an object, you hit download, you'll see that there's a GLB converted format option. You always want to download that option. The size doesn't matter. The biggest one will be the highest textured. It's essentially texture qualities. Don't worry too much about it. If it's a big object, maybe get the smallest one. If it's not a big object, maybe go for the biggest one just so that it looks better. Just make sure that if you are going to get objects, that you aren't looking for objects that are huge. This object is 1.3 million vertices and 2.5 million triangles. That's pretty large. And also, if we look at the size of the download, it's over 100 megabytes, which is not going to work. So look for things that are a bit smaller, and honestly, there's no real guidelines. So just download what you think looks cool, download some few extras, test it out, see if it works, and if it does, awesome. The next thing I like to do is search for images on Google. So I will just look up, let's look up dinosaurs really quickly. And one of the cool things that you can do in Engage is you can bring in PNGs of transparent images. And so what I am going to do is I looked up my topic and I hit Tools and I go to Color and I hit Transparent. And now what I'm going to do is I can download these, assuming it is licensed and I'm not stealing it. You can look for images, and that's another thing that you can add in these tools. So let's just do that. Make sure that we're looking at licensed stuff. It can get a little trickier when you have more restrictions on it, but you can find stuff if you look into it. And the nice thing about these pictures are, because they're transparent, that you won't have any background. And so you can just copy these and drop them into a Google Slides or a PowerPoint, and then within a PowerPoint you can actually left click and save as photo. And when you do that, it will ask you what kind of format you want to save it as, and you can select portable PNGs. If you are going to be uploading images that aren't transparent though, download them as a JPEG if you have the ability. There are a lot of file formats that are available, and so you can just try and upload whatever you want, see how it looks, and if it works, it works. But those are just a few things that I like to do beforehand. For audio, I sometimes use YouTube. Find free use stuff And for clips, I also like to use YouTube as long as it's free use. And the way that you upload these, you're going to be using your files. Now, if you have questions about files, well, you need to be you need to be signed up for the competition, and you need to be in one of our engaged groups for the competition in order to have access to this. So we'll have the link in the description to get to this page, but you won't have access to files unless you are signed up to the competition and set up under one of our accounts. If you need more information or want to see a manual on how to use these, also reach out to the email in the description and we can send you a manual as long as you're signed up for the competition and a member of one of the accounts for the competition. But essentially you just click upload, you select your file, and then you're good to go. So once you have all of your assets collected and you're ready to start building, and maybe not all of your assets, but a good chunk where you want to start putting things onto your timeline or your content creator, you're going to come to Engage and you're going to click Create and Edit. And then you're going to hit Content Creator, and then this is where you load up a content. However, there's typically one more step I like to do before I jump into the timeline and just start placing all of my stuff I got. And that's actually called IFX snapshot creation. So before we continue on to the content creator, I'm going to jump into a live session and explain to you why it's good to create snapshots. And I'll explain to you quickly what snapshots are if you've forgotten. So picking a location when going into a live session and when creating in the content creator are both important. And since we have to do that before we start, I'm just going to explain why that is. When you pick a location and you create a snapshot, that snapshot will live in that location if you want to. So before I bring you into the content creator, I just want to mention one pro tip when working in Engage to create your IFX snapshots. Do you see this option up here for IFX? You're going to want to click on this option before you get started. You're going to want to select these top two items. Now, you definitely want the top item if you're working with others, because this will allow them to move your objects around and also create snapshots of them. This second option creates a sphere around every object you bring in so that you know where to grab the object in order to manipulate it. As an example, I'll bring in this teapot. Do you see the orb around it? That tells you where to go to grab the object. If I turn that option off, all of a sudden I can only see the orb when I highlight it myself. Additionally, the color of the orb tells you if it's shared or not. Because it's purple, that means it's a shared object. Anyone can grab it who has privileges to be able to grab and manipulate objects. If I go and turn off shared when placed, and I bring in another object, you see that it is white. Now, I can still share it after the fact. So the first step to creating a snapshot is bringing in different IFXs. And essentially what a snapshot is it's a collection of IFXs that you have in a room. So just as an example, I'll create one real quick. I'm just going to bring in a few objects. I'm going to change their size up. And I'm going to make some weird contraption. Now this is 3 separate objects, and you can tell by the fact that they have these orbs, where when I click on the orb I'm able to grab it, I can look at the settings, and I see there's orbs for all 3 of them. However, if I want this to be one object that's all connected, I can do that by creating an IFX snapshot. Now, in order to make sure that this orb that I see, where I grab the object, is in the middle of all of these objects, I have to move over to where I want that orb to be before I make the snapshot. So currently you can tell that I'm kind of close to this object right here. I'm almost inside of it. Now I'm going to go into my menu. I'm going to go to IFX, Snapshots, and then this button over here is the one that I want to use. to create the snapshot. I'm going to click this button, and I'm going to select just my IFXs because currently I'm the only one in the room. If I were in the room with others and we were collaborating and building this object together, I might select include shared IFXs if I'm using other people's IFXs. But for now, we're just going to stick with just mine. I'm going to confirm. I'm just going to name it my IFX1. And because I already have an IFX named that, it's going to ask me if I want to overwrite it because you can't have two of the same name. So I'm going to overwrite because that was another example I used earlier. And then if you're set up with our accounts again, you will see this message asking if you want to copy to cloud files. I recommend you always do this, assuming the object is something you know you're going to use. I'm not, so I'm not going to select it. So now that I've created it, let's get out of here. I'm going to move next to this object, and I'm actually going to bring it in using the snapshot that I created. And so finding that, if I were to start back from the beginning, I'm going to go to IFX, snapshots, and then I'm going to see that it's the last one here, my snapshot 1. I'm going to load it, and it asks me if I want to load it in original location. Now if I select that, it will load exactly where it was built, which is a super useful tool when trying to create stuff on the content creator. And I'll get into that more in a moment. But for now, let's just load it. And you can see I can now move it around. It's everything connected. And I can even make it bigger, rotate it. It's much easier now to manipulate that greater object that I wanted to create rather than having to try and move all of these every time I want this quote object moved. So the next thing I'll talk about is that location, original location setting. Now, when I go into snapshots and I want to create one, it asks me that question and I can say yes, and it will load exactly where I created it. Now, this is important when creating objects, putting objects in an environment that are going to be on a content creator. And especially when you have to place them with your hands in VR rather than being on a computer like I am right now. It's far easier to scale things. And by scale, I mean making sure that they seem like a reasonable size, a realistic height, a realistic feel to it. You can't get that with a 2D screen. But when you're in VR, and that's the experience that you're trying to create, you really have to go in and place things by hand, see if they feel right, see if it seems realistic, if it's not breaking immersion. And it's easier to do that in a live session like this and save a snapshot. Currently we're in a live session, not the content creator. And you cannot create snapshots in the content creator, but you can in these live sessions. And when you go into the content creator and you try and place a snapshot versus a normal object, the snapshot will ask you, load an original location, whereas a normal object doesn't have an original location. It won't ask you that, and then you'll have to place it, likely with your headset. And I don't recommend using the content creator with your headset for the bulk of your build. You definitely need to go in there sometimes with your headset to fine-tune things here and there. But for the majority of the time, you'll be using the content creator on the computer because working with timelines, it's just better to have a keyboard and mouse rather than two Joy-Cons. So moving on from just creating objects like this, another thing that you're going to want to do before you jump right into the content creator is actually create your environment set pieces. So one of the rooms that I enjoy the most is the room we're in right now. And that leads me to talking about the locations. As I said before, we were using the live session in order to create the snapshots. So before we even go to the content creator under create and edit, we want to hit join session and we want to hit create. And then we have to pick our location that we want to put these snapshots in. And as I said before, it's important that you choose the location you want to be using because when you create those snapshots, they will have that space as their original location. And so you can't use the original location feature in a location that that snapshot wasn't created in. And so there's a lot of locations, as you might be aware, within Engage, but my personal favorite is the creator space locations. These locations allow you to not only build on a canvas that's completely flat, but there's a specific one called the Creator Blank 360 Room, which allows you to also utilize a 360 video screen as your background. Additionally, there's a 4K version, which lets you do 4K videos. And as an added bonus, there's no floor, which might seem strange at first, but it allows you to add your own environment if you'd like. Now, if you do want a floor, there's obviously creator spaces with grass, pavement, and sand. So you can always use those. I think there's another one with tile as well. But I always prefer having a completely blank space. And so it does look like there might be a floor here, but let me just show you with an object. I can throw this way beneath me, and I can still see it. I can also change the skybox by going to the IFX and looking up skybox. There are a few options that Engage has already. Anyways, moving forward, I want to talk about the next step, which is creating your environment. And so location's important for the IFX snapshot original locations, but if you want to use one of those locations as your environment, you should do so as well, because there's a lot of different options that you have available. However, with this space, you're able to create your own environment, either by building it with some 3D software or finding it online using Sketchfab or another site. I'd like to share with you an environment that we created on our own using some objects that we found online. So I've already scaled it, so I'm going to go to my snapshots and I'm going to select 5 Stages of Grief environment, which is the name that I gave it. And I want to load it in original location, as I've scaled it and placed it in the right spot so that when people spawn in, they're at the very beginning of the environment. So this environment is just a simple one with halls that lead to bedrooms. Each bedroom is going to have signs, videos, buttons, triggers, things that are going to play while you're in the environment that you can interact with. Currently, this is just the environment object though. And the reason it's important is because everything I build after this point needs to fit into this environment nicely. And instead of placing it all when I'm in the content creator, I can go into a live session, set everything up with those IFX snapshots, and then it's easy to bring them in later. So before the object was scaled, as you just saw, I originally brought it in through the uploader, and it looked like this, which is clearly far too large. So in order to make it smaller, I had to use a function called Gizmo. Now, I didn't do this in the computer as I am right now, but I came in on my headset, and I went into Gizmo and I clicked on this section right here, which allows you to switch between scaling, movement, and then rotation. And so the first thing I'm going to go to is I'm going to go to scale, and I'm going to set it properly to 1.5 sensitivity because it can be quite sensitive. And then I'm going to use my joystick. As you can see, that is very sensitive. I'm going to use my joystick. I'm going to do 1/10 to scale it. And I'm going to make it all the way down to where it starts to look normal. Now, it's impossible to tell the scale when you're on a computer in 2D. It looks good, but if I were to go in on headset, it might totally be off still. And so it's really important that you do this on the headset. And then once I've done that, I'm going to want to move it with this translate function so that it's moved to where the beginning of the experience is. So when people spawn in a location, when they join, they always join in the same exact spot. Now, I actually create snapshots right when I jump into a room and name them spawn. And so for this room, I have a spawn 360 4K room, which I put an N instead of an M. And I do load original location, and this is just a cone that I have. Now I'm on the computer right now, and I couldn't even tell that we're not even on the ground. So by bringing in this object, I'm able to see where the ground is. I'm able to see where people are going to spawn. So now I know this is where the ground is. And I know that people are going to spawn on that cone. So I want to move them over here. So huge advice that I have when trying to create an environment like this, putting in objects, setting up your beginning area, and you're in a space that's just blank creator space and you can't tell where people are going to spawn, definitely bring in a cone or any object you want to be your marker. And the first thing you do is you create a snapshot of that marker, and then when you're creating snapshots and you're trying to get a perspective of where the start is, you can bring in that marker. Additionally, when you're setting up the size of your room and you're trying to scale it, it does take a lot of back and forth, scaling it, feeling to see if it's the right size, moving it back to where it needs to be. But it's all worth it later, because this is not something you want to be dealing with when you're in the content creator. It's something you want to deal with before you even jump in, so that you can just drop it in easily. And so as you see, I'm moving my spawn back so that it's in a good spot. I've got all my stuff ready. Now, I'm probably going to want to add some extra stuff in here. But I'm going to start placing all of my snapshots or all of my assets to create snapshots of them. But before I start saving them all, say I bring in this hippo. And it doesn't really make sense to have a hippo in here, but for an example, say I want there to be a hippo in this room. But I don't want the hippo to always be in this room. I want this hippo to show up eventually. What you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up deleting. You're going to, after you save this environment as a snapshot, you're going to end up deleting it. And you're definitely going to delete your cone. And then you're going to save that hippo as an IFX snapshot. The reason you do that is because you don't want to save everything together. You want to save everything individually. So it can be a bit tedious when you have a lot of objects and your environment is custom and you have to keep bringing it back in. But it is well worth the time and effort when using complex items, perhaps not this hippo, but other objects that might be a combination of more than one object, to bring them all in on the content creator as an IFX snapshot in its original location without having to place them individually on that content creation. It's going to save you a lot of time. So now that we've talked about snapshots, setting up your environment, let's actually move into the content creator and get started on what you should do first. So it's finally the time you've all been waiting for. We're going to head to the content creator. We're going to click on create and edit. We're going to hit content creator, and then we're going to hit new scene. Now, as I said earlier, it's important to pick the location that you know you're going to use. I think I want to use the blank creator space, as I've been mentioning, is my favorite. So I'm going to confirm. So now that we're in here, you're going to see that I have my timeline in front of me, and I can also see the environment. Now, in order to move and look around, you can use ASWD, to move, which you can't tell that I'm moving because we're in a blank void. And you can also, to turn, click your right mouse button and drag. So I'm holding it down and I'm dragging to turn. Now I can also hit escape, and now all I have to do is move my cursor, and I look where I move my cursor, and I can still move around freely. Now I'm not bound to the floor as if I'm walking, but I can actually fly up and down. You'll be able to tell the perspective later once I put some stuff on the timeline. You're also able to hit escape to bring your timeline back up, and you're able to move it like this if you want to just focus on the timeline, or down if you want to focus on both what's going on and your timeline. You can also click this button here to get rid of the timeline, and escape to bring it back. There's also a settings bar here where you can start a new sequence, which is the content creation, the lesson, sequence, or content that we are using. Those are all words that Engage uses synonymously with this timeline function that they have. There are tutorials that are available. Some of these are a little outdated at the moment, but they are being updated. And then the only other thing that you're going to be doing or using under these menu settings is the save function. Now that's actually the first thing you want to do when you come in to create something. You're going to want to change the title and click this check to make sure you confirm it. And more importantly, the file name. This is what actually shows up, so it's more important than the title. Make sure you hit that check. As you can see, we currently have the timeline at 5 minutes. So when I go here to see it, I can see I can only go to 5 minutes. I'm not able to zoom out, but only in, because I'm all the way out at 5 minutes. Now that might not be enough time for your actual experience. So what I normally do is at first I'll just up that to 20. And now you can always add or take away from your length later, but I like to have a little bit more room to breathe, and so I usually set it at 20 to begin with. I am going to save it. And again, I don't usually copy to the cloud files for this unless I know I'm going to use it on another device. And so if I need to perhaps go from my computer that I'm working on now and jump in on my headset to test something out, see if it runs smoothly, see how the experience feels in VR, then I'll save it to the cloud, and then I can access it on my headset. But for now, I'm just going to keep it on my device. One thing to note about saving files on the cloud is that on your headset or on your computer or Mac or whatever your personal device that you're using, when you save it locally, that file will overwrite any other file with the same name. However, when you copy it to the cloud, it will just create a new file under the same name, and it will look like a duplicate, but they will be different from any other files that were saved before it. That's one thing to note, that every time you set it to the cloud, every time you save it to the cloud, do not forget to change the file name so that you don't get confused by which one is the most recent one. There's always a date associated with the file names, but to avoid confusion, if you're gonna save it to the cloud, make sure you change the file name. Okay, so the first thing we want to do after we've set all of our settings, we've saved everything, we've given it a title, we're going to want to bring in that environment that we created. So you might not have to bring in a big object because you might be in a different environment that's already created by Engage. But for the sake of the example, I'm going to bring in that 5 stages of grief environment that I created, and I'm going to set that as my environment. So I'm going to load in the snapshot, and it's going to just have me place it wherever I want. And I'm going to have to go into the settings to actually have it set to its original location. So you saw that I just dragged it. I could have zoomed in to get a better look at it if I wanted to, but I find it easy to just drag it because all I need right now is the option, this little gear function. Now there's 2 ways to click on an object and get the options. You can either just click on that and use this IFX options button right here. Whichever option, whatever IFX or asset on your timeline is selected, if you click this, you're able to look at its options. Now I'm going to click this gear because that does the same thing. And now I'm inside of the object settings. Now I'm actually going to change the title to just environment because I want it to be short and easy to see on the timeline that yes, this is the environment. Okay. And then I'm also going to make it so that this is 19 minutes long on the timeline. The reason I didn't do 20 is just so that it doesn't go all the way to the end if I want to put something right after it. There's room still. I can change this later because it's just essentially covering majority of the timeline because it's my environment and there's not going to be a point where people aren't in this environment. So now that I've set the time, I set the title so that it's easier to see. I'm going to hit set original IFX position and you can see it moved. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to hit escape so I can find it. And now you can tell that I have been moving around. I'm able to move up, down using Q and E. E goes down, Q goes up, W forward, S back, A, D to go left and right. And you're able to fly through everything in this mode. In the creator mode, you can go underground, you can go up in the sky. It's just so that you can edit easily and you're not bound to the floor. So we can see I have my environment here. It's all exactly in the spot that I set that IFX earlier. And I'm going to go back into my timeline and I'm going to create what I call a loop. And what that is it's just going to essentially cause the experience to loop the first 30 seconds. So people will be stuck in the same spot for the first 30 seconds and nothing will progress until everyone is ready. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to use a couple special functions that Engage has. The first one is an IFX. So I'm going to go into IFX and I'm going to go over to this button over here and I'm going to hit special functions. So I'm going to click on special functions. I'm going to click on this check mark and it's going to take me to all the special functions. There's a lot of cool tricks that you can do using these IFXs, but right now we're just going to focus on this one, skip to time. So the first thing I want to do is set my custom name so that I know what it does when I see it on the timeline. And this is going to send us back to 0. So I'm going to put skip to 0. I'm also going to change it so that it's exactly 30 that it puts on the timeline. And I'm actually going to set this to 59 seconds. And I'll explain that in a few moments. So I don't need to change the input because I want it to take me to 0. I'm going to save the effect. And now when I hit play, we're at 29 seconds right now. Watch this timer right here. I'm going to hit play. It's going to take me back to 0. So now when people load in, because it's the beginning of the content, they're going to load in here and it's just going to keep looping the first 30 seconds. So whatever I want to have, people see when they load in, I'm going to place it in that first 30 seconds and it's just going to loop infinitely. Now the next thing we need to do is create an option to get out of the loop, to start the content, to get on with the experience, and that's going to be with a trigger. So I'm going to hit trigger, and we have multiple different triggers. We have ones where people can walk up to them and they trigger it when they walk into them. Not preferable for a beginning section, as we don't want people to accidentally start the content before they're ready. We have buttons, we have interactables, but right now we're just going to focus on the buttons. So we have two buttons. One is just this blank rectangle, which allows you to kind of place it on pictures. So if you want to create your own button look, you can use this option. It's just the UI, it's a rectangular, and it can be placed on pictures. or we have this actual 3D button, which is actually 3 dimensionals. So I'm going to use that one just so that you can see it. You can see it is actually 3D, so it's its own button built in. Because I don't currently have a picture to use, we're going to use this one. And so now that I've created it, I'm going to click on it. And in the settings, I'm going to change the custom name to Start. And right now for the UI, I'm just going to put Start. I'm going to change this to 31, so the end time now overlaps with the skip to time. I like to do that just to make sure that it doesn't disappear right before you loop, just extra safe. So this button though is only available when you're in that initial starting 30-second loop. So I'm going to save before adding any triggers, just because I want to make sure that all of my settings save. So I'm going to hit save, and then I'm going to go back to IFX options, and I'm going to hit new on the trigger. So right here, oh, let me go back to it. Right here at the end is your trigger effects. I'm going to hit new. And so there's a lot of things I can have this do. I can have a recording play when you hit the start button. I can have an IFX show up or a snapshot that I've created. I can create some sort of interactable object. I can set up a quiz to play. And then you have your cloud files, which is just objects and images that are not in your IFX or your snapshots that you've uploaded. So for this, I want to get us out of the loop. So I'm going to use the IFX. And again, we're going to use special functions, skip to time IFX. Now, it never matters where you put these on the actual environment. They're invisible. It's just kind of a placeholder that it's a thing. Now, in order to edit that skip to time, because that skip to time is just going to take us back to 0 as it is default, I have to go back into my options for that button that I placed. And now I see that I have a trigger here. It's the skip to time that I placed. I'm going to click on it, and I'm actually going to change the custom name to skip to 1. It doesn't matter what the length is, so I'm not going to bother. And I'm going to actually change the input now to 1 minute. Now, the reason I did 1 minute is because earlier, for the skip to time that does the loop, I made it only 59, it ends at 59 seconds. And that's so that it doesn't overlap with this. When we get teleported to 1 minute, the Engage won't accidentally think, oh, they want to hit the skip to time back to 0. And so that's why I put that skip to time ending at 59 seconds instead of a minute. But now that we have a way out of our loop, you'll see what happens. So again, when we get to 30 seconds, it will loop us back to 0. But now, when I hit start, all of a sudden we are past the loop, and the experience can start. And so perhaps at 1 second, at 1 minute and 1 second, I might place a recording, and it could be a guided tour. Maybe it's an object, a sign that prompts you to do an activity, read something, interact with something. But essentially what I just created here is just kind of an introduction area. This introduction area is important because when people join your experience, they don't all load at the same rate. Say you have 5 people joining, and it takes one person a whole minute to load, and everyone else loads within 10 to 30 seconds. If you have stuff that just starts playing, like recordings, or objects start appearing at like 14 seconds and 24 seconds, and things just start populating, you've got all the stuff that just starts playing right away, you're going to have a lot of people that are both struggling to load that content in before it actually shows up. And also you're going to have people who don't see anything, not even the environment, because they're still waiting for everything to load on their headset or computer or whatever device they're using. So this allows for people to kind of join in and you can manage as a host, or they can manage themselves if it's a self-serving experience, to kind of get collected, make sure their headset's loaded, everything's there, and then they can start it on their own, or you can start it after saying, hey, is everyone all loaded? Is everything ready? Are you guys good? All right, let's start. Let me hit this button. There are even buttons that are only available to the host. So if you want to be able to create an experience that has to be toured, and then the person who is host will be the only person who can mess with the triggers. Another thing to mention is when you are on the headset or the computer, you're in the actual content, not the content creator, but you're in the experience in a live session. When people are loading it, as the host, you actually get to see what everyone's percentage is, where they are at loading their loading in the content. And so this is nice because you can sit and look at the users on your menu and see, all right, is everyone loaded yet? Do we have 100% across the board? No, let's wait a little bit. And then once everyone's ready, I'll hit the start button and we'll start bringing stuff in. So once you've got your little basics set up, I do recommend that you save often and don't forget to save, because things can happen. Internet connection could go out, the software could crash if you got too much running on your computer. You don't want to lose progress, so always remember to save often, even after doing something as simple as just setting up a few objects and time skips. Anyways, now that we have our base, let's do some more let's bring in some fun stuff. One of the coolest things that you can do in Engage is you can actually bring in like chroma key green screen effects. And so there's an object in IFX. If you look up screen, there's an object called chroma key video faces user. Now there's a lot of chroma key effects, and that's essentially, it's just a green screen effect. However, the faces user one, this one is especially cool because it actually allows you to place things in the environment that when people walk around them, it always faces them. And so it looks like it's a hologram. It almost looks like it's 3 dimensions because you can't see that it's flat because it's always facing you. And so I can explain this better. Let me just bring it in. And so in order for you to be able to see it in the content creator, they've created an outline for you, but it's actually clear when users look at it otherwise. So I'm going to place it, oh my goodness, sorry, difficult to place things. This is why I place things on as snapshots. This object you actually can't place as actually you can. Yeah, you could place this in a live session and just get a snapshot of it. So you don't have to be flying around like a mess like I am, trying to place it and make sure it looks good. You can just place it easily in your headset. But for the example and to save time, we're just going to place it there. And I am going to, now that's not enough as it is because we still need something to play. So I'm going to actually take this and I'm going to make it 0. I'm going to have it start at 0 and I'm going to have it go to, :00. I'm going to have it go to 3 minutes just for now. And I'm going to put I'm just going to put video screen. I made it shorter for my own use because, like I said, it's easier to see it on here when it's shorter and it's not just some default name. I'm going to move it down because sometimes that happens. Things don't normally overlap, but sometimes they do like that. And now that I have it here, I want to add another IFX. And this one, again, is in the special functions. and we're going to go to the second page, and we want this play shared screen video. Now it doesn't matter where you put it, but it does matter is the settings. Now we want this to play at 1:01. So when I hit that button, you have 1 second, and then it starts playing. And it looks like it only goes for 30 seconds. This video that I'm going to play, I'm not sure how long it is, but I'm just going to set it to 3 minutes because that's how long the screen lasts. So it's going to go to 3 minutes. I'm going to set that to 0. By the way, these right here are frames. Engage runs at 30 frames per second, and you can place things down to the frame. And so essentially every second there's 30 frames. And so you were able to really place things down to the very, millisecond. I don't know what a millisecond actually is, but very, very, very precise placement of objects in the timeline. So I have this URL. This is just something I found on YouTube. I looked up green screen stuff, and I just found the first video that looked good, and I put it in here. It's a 2D video, so I'm going to have 2D video selected. Now if I wanted it to loop, I might select loop. This might be something that you want if you have, like, say, a green screen effect. Maybe it's a waterfall, and you are putting that on a cliff IFX that you built. You might want that to loop, and so you'd have that playing pretty much the whole timeline, and you just have it there playing. You probably wouldn't want a always facing screen unless maybe it was a water fountain, but this would be, that would be a good example of use for the chroma key. I'm going to turn the volume off just for purposes of recording this, and it was a really loud video. So I'm going to save the effects, and before we spoil it, hit play. I'm going to hit my button. Now you notice there was that load right there, but this is what the video is. So I can move around it, and it's actually flat. It's not a perfect green screen, as you can kind of tell, but that's more of the quality of the video I found rather than the actual software. If you bring in high quality footage on a green screen that's recorded in 8K, it's going to look amazing. Now I'm not saying you need that, but I just found a random video on YouTube, and you can see how that looks. You see I have no background. Everywhere I go, it's always facing me. It's a dragon. I can also, what we're going to do next is, I don't really like how it goes black like that and it loads. And so what I want to do to fix that, I'm going to start using keyframes. And I'm also going to start using, going into those very precise, zooming in and seeing the frames. And so this is the last thing I'm going to cover before we finish. But this is a pretty advanced skill, and once you master it, it can be very useful, especially when trying to avoid things like that load screen. So what I'm going to do is I want to make sure that this object is out of frame when that load screen hits. And with keyframes, I'm able to make it so that I can have this move in and out of the scene before that happens. I could even have this dragon walking around if I wanted to, but we don't have enough time to do all of that right now. I will show you how you can do it though. So first things first, I want to see how long it takes. So I'm zooming way in just so I can see all right, around where is it loaded? And this is something that you might have to do extra tests on headset. You will have to create keyframes here, go in on headset later, see if it loads the same speed, see if it works good. With videos, generally they do load pretty quick now, but it's something that this takes more than just one edit on the computer. You might have to go in on the headset and watch it and see if it worked the way you wanted it to, and then go back and edit it again based on those times. But more or less, we're just gonna edit it once over and see how it looks. So you're probably a little bit overwhelmed with all this information, but it'll make sense as I start to do it. So I'm going to hit play so I can see how long it takes to load. Okay, so it took about 20 frames. Easy. Very easy. So what we're going to do, I'm actually going to do probably 30 frames, might as well, which is a whole second. So I am going to hit, I have this screen selected. I'm going to hit, actually I don't, I want this thing selected. And actually, I don't even need to, I can go to 1 minute. 1 minute. And I'm going to hit this. Sorry, no, I'm gizmoing the object, the screen. And I'm going to gizmo it just under the floor. So I'm going to do 1/10 because it goes really fast sometimes. Oh, it's going slow. Okay, let's do 1/2 sensitivity. I clicked on this arrow and I'm going to bring it underground. I'm going to bring it a little bit extra underground because sometimes the load will show past its actual boundaries. And now that it's down here, I'm not going to hit the X. I'm going to hit, you see I have my time at 1. I am highlighting this object. I have it in Gizmo. I'm going to hit this button. This is a key. This sets a keyframe. So I'm going to hit that. And now what that does is it now set a key where it's down below ground. And you can see it's starting to come back up. That's because when I set a key for the first time, and that key, essentially what it is it's like at this key, which I just set right at 1 minute, this object will be in the location that you had it. Now, it's moving back to its original location as I move back to 0 minutes, and that's because when you create your first key, Engage will just place a key at 0 seconds at its original location that you had placed it before. I believe they do this so that you don't lose that original location if you did end up wanting to use it. And ironically enough, I do want to use it. I just don't want it at 0 seconds. So what I did to get to this sheet, which is called a dope sheet, is I was on my timeline and I hit the diamond. And I have the object I want selected. So I'm going to hit that diamond. And I want to move this. I don't want it at 0 seconds. I want to move it. So I'm going to click it, and you can see it's highlighted. And I'm going to hit this button. This button is the copy button. So I'm going to hit copy. And now I'm going to move over here. And so one thing to note is it looks like the dope sheet is the same time as the timeline. That's not true. This video screen just happens to start at 0 minutes. And so the dope sheet matches the timeline. Normally the dope sheet will give you the timeline will always start at 0 for the dope sheet, and that's just 0 in relation to the object's length on the timeline. So if my object was 5 minutes long, and that's, you know, when I set my start and end time in the settings, it will be a 5 minute long timeline, and it will start at 0 and go to 5. It actually goes well past 5. It'll actually keep going forever because you can actually set keyframes after the object disappears. But we won't worry about that right now. Just a quick note that don't think that this timeline matches the actual timeline. It does not. It is just relative to the object. So I want this to come up at 1:01. Actually, I want it to come up. It takes till 1:20, doesn't it? Until it's ready loaded. Let's try 1:25 just to be on the safe side. And so that's, by the safe side, I mean like it's definitely loaded at this point at 1:25, right? And so I want it to be that original keyframe. So now you see it's back up and it goes down. Now you can see it still loads right here. And that means that I still want it to be underground. So I have the original right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit copy, or I'm going to select it and I'm going to copy it. And I'm actually going to bring this, seems to stop right here. Let's bring it right here at 1:01:10. Let's paste. So now, oh, it's still bad. All right, let's take this, copy. Let's keep bringing it further and further. Let's do it at 30 now. Or, well, not 30, but 3 seconds. 3 seconds to 1, that's fine. I don't need to get it perfect for the point of explanation. So now I'm gonna delete the old one, and I delete it by selecting it and hitting this key with a cross. Speaking of deleting, before we forget, let's delete this. We don't want it. And then I think it actually looks like that's okay. So it loads right there. Let's put it right maybe here. That way it's about a second to zoom up. Though maybe I don't want it to zoom up in a second. I mean, so you could either set a key here. I'll show the example. Set a key here, and then it takes, these two don't even matter anymore, so I'll just delete them to avoid confusion. So we can have it like that. Unfortunately, you see the green window. That's because this is a green screen video, and outside is a green screen 360. So if you were wondering why that turned green, it's because it's playing the actual video, not on a chroma key, but on a 360 video screen. You can get rid of that just by placing a skybox over it, and the skybox will cover it. Anyways, side tangent. Back to this. You can have it, I have it coming up over, with a second. It's now underground when it loads, so let me just go underground for you. So that's how that works. But maybe I don't want it to, I want it to just appear. I don't want it to look like it zoomed up. I can do that by copying this and then going to one frame. This is that 1 minute, 3 seconds, and 1 frame. This is 1 frame earlier, 3 seconds flat. I'm gonna paste that thing, and now we're gonna watch it. And so you probably noticed it did zoom up, but I'm gonna tell you right now, if you hadn't seen me do that, if you didn't know the secret behind it, you probably wouldn't have noticed. And additionally, let's do one last thing just to put up the cool factor. Say I want to add some effect to make it look cool. There are effects in here. So if I go to iFXs and I go over to effects, there's some really cool stuff that you can bring in. I'm gonna head to the last page because there's a specific effect that I'm looking for. But I definitely recommend you go through and you test all these out. Some of these you won't have on your headset, so you might want to check this out both on computer and on your headset. Like this one is not on the headset. It will show up for people using headset. It just isn't on the headset as something that you can use, at least as of right now. But obviously I didn't really place that, so let's just see how it looks. Okay, so I have to move it, but actually let's move it. Gizmo. It's hard to figure out where things are when you're not on headset. It's almost impossible. So this is something that you'd want to go in on headset and place, because I just can't tell where it is. There's no way to tell because it's 2D. But that's pretty cool. Now, these are just things that I found in all of, like a 5-minute search on the internet. I found this dragon. So this isn't even like the highest quality thing you could find or make. But it got the effect in the example. So it's something that you can, go in and spend extra time. That's why before you get into the content creators, it's really nice to kind of put some time and looking for different objects that you want to use for your experience, because it really pays off when you come in and you bring them to life. That's all we're going to cover for right now, but you can see how with the keyframes, how I have it, transition, how you might also be able to use that to have, say, something walk from A to B. All of the objects in the Engage's inventory that are, not all of them, but majority of these, say, animals, or there's some objects of people. You can even do recordings when you move it. When you set one of these to go from A to B, they will actually. This is a huge velociraptor. they will actually animate. As you see, it's animating, it's doing its animation walk. You can actually set that, like with the keyframes. When you create a keyframe, they will follow the animation. They will do their animations to follow that keyframe of like moving from A to B. You can also use the option Puppeteer, which is right here, record puppet. When selecting an object, you can hit record puppet. It gives you a lot of time because it wants you to be able to grab the object and get ready. And you can move it around. This is not a very exciting recording, but you move it around, and then when you're done recording, you hit escape, and or the menu option for the headset, which is both of your triggers at once. And now when I click on the Velociraptor, now you see all those lines? Those are keyframes. They set the keyframes for me. And so when I play it, the Velociraptor moves as I recorded it. So I don't recommend you record on a computer like I am. Go into your headset and do it, and definitely practice beforehand. You want to practice your puppeteering skills before you just start sending a bunch of recordings. Because it takes time, you got to wait for the 5 seconds for it to start. So do some practice, do some dry runs, and then record it. That's a very powerful tool to create animation and then bring it into your content. And so, like I said, also recordings. When you bring in a recording of an avatar and you think like, oh, I kind of don't want them standing here, I want them to walk over there. Keyframes will let you do that too. It'll let you rotate them and walk, and their feet will animate as if they're moving, as if that was the original recording. So very useful tool, and there's a lot you can do with it. But that's everything I want to show for now. I hope you guys learned a lot, and I hope you get out there and you start building soon.